All right. This is Michael Sky. It is March 29th, 2024. I am beginning a playlist on my YouTube channel and on my podcast around the honor window. This is a very powerful tool for transcending our personal and interpersonal delusions, our self delusions. It's also a powerful tool for, understanding the madness of our world. So we are going to review a recent Twitter post discussed by Elon Musk and far right leader God Saad. And take a look at this tool. And this tool is powerful for anyone who, you really want to make sense of the world today. And this tool, however, is best understood and utilized with yourself. So we're going to talk about it in a bit of a theoretical sense on a cultural level today. But if after this conversation you have a sense that you might want to try this tool for yourself, then reach out to me. So this tool, by the way, was developed as a result of, when I grew up as an Orthodox Mormon, very much a true believer. It was a very black and white world. And on the inside were our people, our tribe, the good guys. And on the outside were the deluded people, the people deluded by the devil, or at least the people who don't know the truth. I grew up in that world. And then when I was about 20, I left that world and wandered in the darkness beyond my previous cultural bubble and explored that other world for many years. And in that exploration, I was searching for meaning, and I was aiming to help bring my divided family back together. So my parents had got divorced when I was 14, and this kind of ruptured my whole worldview. Everything was up and down, or upside down. And in that state of divorce, all of a sudden, one side of the family is viewing themselves as right or righteous, and the other side as evil, and the same thing on the other side. So it's like this kind of both sides, either one side is right and the other side is wrong, or they're both deluded to some extent. And I was trying to resolve this conflict and bring my family back together. Through that journey, a number of uh, tools were developed to help me to navigate that world and bring my people back together. So the honor window is one of those tools, and we're gonna look at that here today as it applies to the cultural self delusion that God Saad says we suffer from in the West, or that at least our politicians suffer from. So I saw this tweet by Elon Musk. He says this video speaks for itself, and the description of the video is that a freeloading migrant influencer mocks U.S. taxpayers who work like slaves while waving cash in latest videos. So I guess there's some influencer who's basically telling other potential immigrants, hey, come to the US, you can take advantage, you can get paid cash, and you can take over people's homes as well. And then God Saad replied, he said, this is not unlike when I've previously been told by noble Arab-speaking immigrants that the West is akin to a woman being mounted. And yes, he's a native Arabic speaker, and he's basically saying that, in the view of Arabs or Arab countries, America looks like a cuck, basically just letting themselves be taken advantage of. And then he does a follow-up. He says, I wrote an article recently about cultural theory of mind, specifically that the West lacks it. The West thinks that some of the values it views as laudable will be perceived by others similarly, whereas in many instances, these are viewed as signs of weakness, ripe for exploitation. And he links to an article that he wrote a few months back. So what I'd like to do is take a look at that article and then map it onto the honor window for further insight and sense making. So again, his title here is The West Suffers from Cultural Self-Delusion. And there is a photo of a Western politician in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And God says that, not God as in God, but God Saad says, in several of the courses I have taught, I have at times covered how cultural misunderstandings can result in costly business mishaps. So yeah, from one culture to another, there's a lot of blindness. Naturally, people using completely different languages have completely different cultural reference points, cultural narratives. And I came to, this was for me was like when I left the Mormon uh, a realm or bubble and went out into the realm of the non-believers. And then in 2010, I left the world of America to go explore the non-American world. And when I say I left America, I didn't just leave America. Like I was consciously leaving behind my American paradigm, my American cultural paradigm. And, inside of the word culture is C-U-L-T, cult. And I came to discover that it's very much the case that we have cultural blinders. There are certain things that we are not supposed to think about. And there are certain ways that we are supposed to view the world and certain values that we're supposed to uphold. And anything less is judged. So leaving my culture and going out to explore other cultures by living deeply in them was profound. And it was a wild adventure that I've been on for the last 14 years and counting. I'm now in Nairobi. So he says, beyond language, symbols too can yield cross-cultural misunderstandings due to culture-specific connotations of a particular symbol. A deer, he says, might serve as a symbol of being graceful in one culture and of homosexuality in another. Yes, even from one Spanish-speaking country in Latin America to another, the same words and symbols can have very different meanings. So he says he'd like to introduce a supra layer of possible cross-cultural misunderstandings. And to do so, I must first introduce the concept of theory of mind, namely the ability to place oneself in the mind of another when interacting with them. He says it is a fundamental feature of our sociality. It is perhaps not surprising that one of the ways to diagnose autism in a young child is by demonstrating that they lack theory of mind. Theory of mind or lack thereof is typically ascribed to an individual, but I propose that it is a concept that can be applied at the cultural level. So what he's saying here is, take an autistic child, basically lacks the ability to put himself in the shoes of the other and to get a sense of the other's worldview. And God Saad is saying that as cultures, we can have a theory of mind of other cultures or lack a theory of mind of other cultures. He says a culture X that exhibits theory of mind at the cultural level is one that is capable of understanding the values and beliefs that shape the behaviors of members of culture Y. Clearly, while many cultural values are universally held, others vary greatly across cultures, especially in the context of geopolitical dynamics. So there it's obvious to me that someone from a particular culture, or even the majority of people from a particular culture, suffer a cultural blindness to the extent that they are self-righteous in their attitude towards another culture. I remember my first trip to Africa in 2006, and my sense was, how much I could teach uh, Kenyans, and I wanted to teach about entrepreneurship and vision and leadership. And over my subsequent trips, or even on that first trip, I realized just how much they had to teach me. That was shocking. I saw things that didn't make sense according to my cultural worldview, according to my, yeah, the world that I had grown up in America. So he says Western politicians view magnanimity, empathy, kindness, and tolerance toward outgroup members as laudable traits. It is a form of virtuous largesse that permits Western leaders to pat themselves on the back whilst admiring their reflections in the mirror. And yeah, one of the insights I had in 2006 when I landed in Dubai, I landed in the Middle East. I remember walking into this huge airport with just, the planes that were there. Emirates Airlines were just ginormous, and the inside of the airport it was as well. And it was just like, man, the wealth was on another scale. And the local people are dressed in a very kind of regal attire. And there was a man who walked by, and he's speaking all Arabic, so I understand none of it. Um, Except in the middle of his speaking, he says, Big Mac, large fry, and then goes back to speaking Arabic. And we stayed overnight in Dubai there, and I saw George Bush on TV, and it was interesting seeing George Bush, who was the president at the time, from a whole different angle. Because I was coming from Texas, and Americans, or whatever country is the global hegemon, or the empire at the time. I think it's natural to have that people from that culture carry a certain kind of arrogance, a certain kind of, our way is the right way. At least it's the dominant way. And there tends to be less, I don't know, ability to see from the other's point of view. Well, watching from the Middle East, and aware that people might be seeing me based on how they saw George Bush, I was kind of embarrassed because he had this really arrogant affect. It was like, oh man, I remember feeling a little bit embarrassed just the way he was speaking. And then when you map onto that he's the leader of the free world, and if the Arab nations, the Middle Eastern nations don't obey, he can drop bombs. If they do obey, they can get paid. And I just got a sense of you know the social dynamic there of this kind of arrogant leader kind of forcing his way, and the kind of shame this could bring up from people of another culture who are put in this position of kind of being forced to go along or not go along. Especially the shame that might be there as, the next mornings we were driving back to the airport. We passed the Fuddruckers, and like, some of the, I don't know, the let's say the less dignified parts of our culture were spreading throughout this very dignified Middle Eastern culture, tribal culture. And that was an interesting, yeah, that was kind of the beginning of me beginning maybe to have a theory of mind of Middle Eastern cultures. So yes, but our assumption that as Americans, and me as an American growing up, a very patriotic American coming from a very conservative family, believing that we are, not only was I from God's chosen people as a Mormon, I was in God's chosen country. America was a country blessed by God. And we kind of have a responsibility to spread our godlike ways throughout the world. We are the righteous ones, and those who resist us or view things differently, a little bit less righteous. And so we kind of have this permission from this kind of self-righteous arrogance to force our way in the world, force democracy in the world. And of course, we can see that Americans' attempts to do that over the last, many years has resulted in a lot of bloodshed. Even here, right here in Kenya, it wasn't the Americans, but the British. When the British left, they had drawn straight lines through tribal territory to make the nation of Kenya, and implemented democracy, which the British viewed as the more moral system. Well, what happened now is basically they just granted power of one tribe to dominate all other tribes, because it just so happened that the way they drew the lines through the tribal territories meant that one tribe had a vast majority. And it's contributed to a lot of conflict. And of course, you can see that playing out in other, especially tribal regions as well, where well-meaning Americans have thought we're doing good and blind to the other culture, and then end up causing a lot of lost life, chaos, damage, so many unforeseen consequences of our good intentions. Continuing with Saad's article, he says, granting entry to millions of immigrants who otherwise possess values that are perfectly antithetical to those of the host nations is a manifestation of cultural blindness. So doesn't it seem a bit insane that we would just allow millions of immigrants per year who have values completely opposite to our own, in opposition to our own, to come in? And it looks to me like a recipe for chaos and violence and danger. So he says, exhibiting endless military restraint towards belligerent adversaries as a means of building compassionate trust is an exemplar of cultural blindness. There are so many regions in the world where the maxim "might is right" is de rigueur. So in the same way that I am unable to converse with someone who speaks Cantonese because I do not speak that language, politicians who do not speak the meta language inherent to cultural theory of mind will tackle geopolitical dynamics through a biased prism. If you do not possess cultural theory of mind, you end up implementing devastatingly bad policies because you are exhibiting a form of cultural self-delusion. Namely, you hold the misguided view that the values cherished in your society must be those that are equally cherished by everyone else around the world. It is a form of narcissistic cultural imperialism. Nothing could be further from the truth. So I'd like to use a simple version of the honor window diagram to even make some more sense here, and to kind of show this and offer this as a sense-making tool in these times of culture wars and geopolitical wars, Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Palestine. But if you really want to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, apply this to someone who you are resentfully judging right now, especially a primary relationship like a wife or a husband, mother or father, son or daughter, brother or sister. Yeah, that's where you can have like a real awakening. A little bit harder to do when we're looking at things abstractly through a cultural lens. But I think we can get a sense of it here. So he goes on to say, as someone who was born and raised in the Middle East, I am always baffled by the astounding cultural blindness exhibited by the likes of Justin Trudeau a man-child void of worldly savoir-faire, which I think means like street knowledge. Uh, could be very wrong on that, but I think that's, kind of common sense. Dancing in Indian dress, as did Trudeau several years ago, is further proof of cultural blindness. The ability to optimally converse with leaders originating from radically different societies is not rooted in donning their sartorial garb or in having language translators on hand, but in fully possessing a well-honed cultural theory of mind, which regrettably few, if any, of our Western politicians possess. All right, so let's go back up to our our image here. All right, so in this honor window, I'm just going to give you a sample here. And what would be best would be to be doing this with a Justin Trudeau personally, because otherwise I'm just going to have to make up. I'm going to have to invent things that he might say, and this is an honor window that he might have if he were judging God Saad. Okay. Now, those of you who are familiar with the honor window, you've heard me describe it as we should start in quadrant 1, which is bottom left, and then move to quadrant 2, which is upper right, then go to quadrant 3, which is lower right, and then upper left, which is quadrant 4. However, you can start in other quadrants, and there are instances when that works out easiest. In this particular example, it just turns out that God Saad has started us off in quadrant 2, telling us how many Western politicians, perhaps Trudeau in particular, view themselves. And so now we could go from this quadrant to any of the other quadrants next. But, and by the way, we're going to look at this honor window first, and then we'll go to one having to do with Middle Eastern countries, and make sense of this cultural blindness or cultural self-delusion, if you will. And yeah, we all really have self-delusion and cultural self-delusion. So this isn't to pick too much on the poor prime minister. Ideally, we're all humble and courageous enough to admit we all have our delusion. All right. So in the way that Justin Trudeau stands for being magnanimous. Now, we're going to particularly apply these. Let's call this a virtue: being magnanimous, empathetic, kind, tolerant. These are all like virtues, right? Things that perhaps Justin Trudeau might say he stands for being. And in particular, in relation to international issues, border issues. Yes. So, in the specific way that Justin Trudeau stands for being magnanimous, God Saad might say that he is irresponsible, in the sense that he's not properly guarding or protecting his country. Right? We could use other words there, but let's go with that for now. In the specific way that God Saad might say Justin Trudeau is empathetic. Sorry, in the specific way that Trudeau might say Trudeau is empathetic, God Saad might say, yeah, maybe, but you are delusional, right? So yes, you're being empathetic to all these people coming across the border from different countries. Um, but in your empathy, you're deluded to the fact that many of these people might hold virtues completely opposite to Canada or the US. And yeah. All right. So then, in the specific way that Justin Trudeau might stand for being kind, God Saad might say, and if God Saad is watching this, um, God Saad, the far right leader, uh, and you're interested in this tool, I'd be very happy to actually go through it with you or talk to you about this. I think you'd be interested in it. But in a specific way that Trudeau stands for being kind, God Saad might say, yeah, maybe, but you're too weak. Um, and in the specific way that Trudeau stands for being tolerant, God Saad might say that he's too, I come back to weak, um, foolish, perhaps. Anyone, if you guys are following this, you might have different words that came up, and that would be fine. So let's go now to quadrant 1. In the specific way that Trudeau stands for being magnanimous, but God Saad says he is irresponsible, God Saad might say that he stands for being um, responsible, wise, um, a good protector of his people, of his culture, of his country, something like this. In a specific way that Trudeau stands for being empathetic, yet God Saad calls him delusional. God Saad might say that he personally stands for being perhaps clear-eyed, perhaps intelligent, like this. And in a specific way that Trudeau stands for being kind, yet God Saad views him as weak. God Saad personally stands for being perhaps rationally compassionate, or dutiful. Again, would be better to have either one of these specific guys here to go through this thing for themselves, but I'm kind of making it up for the example. So if in a specific way that Trudeau stands for being tolerant, yet God Saad might view him as foolish, God Saad might say that he personally, when it comes to these issues, stands for being, I come back to wise, not duped, culturally informed, a voice of reason, etc. All right, and then to go to the last quadrant here. Let's see which direction we want to go. In a specific way that Justin Trudeau stands for being magnanimous, he might look at God Saad and say that He is extreme, judgmental, um, has no heart, something like this. In a specific way that Trudeau stands for being empathetic, he could look at God Saad on this issue and say and judge him as being um, heartless, cold, something like this. These are all kind of the same. They all kind of fit into the same category here, right? Um, Magnanimous, empathetic, kind, tolerant. It's all kind of overlapping. If we were doing an honor window with one individual with another, we would have a bunch of, we'd start off in the lower left-hand quadrant with a bunch of judgments of the other that refer to specific, let's say, hurts or transgressions or violations that the person who's drawing the honor window experiences, and then has judgments of the other for those. These are all very similar, kind of in the same, talking about the same thing here. But in the way that Trudeau stands for being kind, he might judge God Saad as um, being, racist, rude, mean, these sorts of things. And in the specific way that Trudeau stands for being tolerant, might view God Saad as being, we could say racist again. Everything comes down to racist, right? All right. So now what there is to see here in this first part of the honor window, which we're only going to really look at the first part of the honor window, is in the delusion, the self-delusion that God Saad is talking about. The more someone is deluded, the more they're only going to see the reality as these two quadrants. This is me, and this is the other. So this is, Trudeau might say, this is who I'm standing for being, and how I think about things, how I do things, how I say things. And this is how people like God Saad on the far right, this is how they are. Me and my people, we're magnanimous, empathetic, kind, and tolerant. Those far right guys, those guys like God Saad and Jordan Peterson, they have no heart. They're cold. They're racist, right? So, and to the extent that someone is kind of locked into this battle with another, this battle of judgments of the other, as many of us are in the culture war, God Saad or someone like him could be just viewing himself as standing for being all of these things, and viewing the others as delusional, irresponsible, weak, and foolish. So now, how does this map onto the cultural delusion with the Middle East? Let's take a look at a different simple honor window diagram here. And on this side of the honor window, we have Middle Eastern countries. And on this side, we have Trudeau or Western politicians. So I would say that because the primary judgment dynamic or culture war that Trudeau is present to is the one in his home culture, between the people in his culture who he might label far right or racist. The last thing that he ever wants to be perceived as is too racist or judgmental by anyone at any time. He's so locked into this conflict that he will do anything to avoid being seen as racist, heartless, judgmental. And so he's going hard, he's going hard right in a way, hard upper right direction, right? So when it comes time for policies in the Middle East, or policies with immigration, and he's thinking of closing the border or building a wall or things like this, these immediately seem like things that the other side might do. And so he might be quick to label them racist and then go in the extreme other direction this way. Now, when he does this, one of some of the virtues he cuts himself off from are the virtues on this side: being responsible, being wise, being a good protector. Um, yeah, and what could be awesome is if he could integrate his shadow here. Really, this is in his shadow, this quadrant here. Both of these could be said to be in his shadow because he cannot see what the other side, he cannot really see with his heart, let's say, what the other side is standing for. So both of these are in his shadow. So he doesn't have access to being as good of a protector as he could be, or as responsible as he could be for his people. What would be awesome is he could integrate both of these and be responsible and magnanimous, a magnanimous, great protector for his people. If he could be clear-eyed and empathetic as a leader, if he could be rationally compassionate, dutiful, and kind, like all at the same time, so if we can integrate there, then it's very powerful. But let's go back to talking about the cultural self-delusion. So we're going to go back to this other simple honor window here, and we could attempt to draw out an honor window, where Trudeau or Western politicians, let's say more left-leaning ones these days, are standing for these values, or we could write these in terms of virtues being So, and how they might judge Middle Eastern countries. Well, the key point here is that they're likely to hold these judgments of these Middle Eastern countries, but not want to even show it or admit it to themselves, perhaps. They so just want to be viewed as magnanimous, empathetic, kind, and tolerant, because this other war, the culture war, is their primary dynamic. They're primarily afraid of being judged by these people that they judge, the people they might view as on the far right. So now there's a lot more to the honor window. As I've said, it's most powerful to do personally, you with someone, that a loved one who a war is breaking out in the relationship. It's starting to deteriorate. You're starting to lose mutual trust and influence. And hopefully this is insightful for those of us who are aiming to solve the culture war, bring some return us to sanity in the modern world, and also for the men who are on my honor quest that has just begun, who are looking to use the honor window as a tool for their relationships to become a wiser, more integrated, and more trusted leader of and for their people. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Reach out to me if you'd like to know more about the honor window. I intend to do more of these videos introducing you to this powerful tool.